right now. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Desa Curry Daniel. I am a doctoral student at University of New Mexico. I am the Division 45 student representative, and today I'm very excited to host Dr. Johnson-Esparza from Denver, and she'll be talking about navigating the internship process. So Dr. Johnson, Dr. Johnson-Esparza is a staff psychologist and director at Medical Assisted Treatment at Salud Family Health Centers, a large federally qualified health center system providing behavioral health services in Colorado. She completed her predoctoral internship at University of Colorado School of Medicine, Department of Family Medicine. She specializes in integrated primary health psychology and is involved in direct patient care, training and supervision, primary care research, and program development. Her primary areas of interest are working with underserved and Spanish-speaking immigrant populations. Additional areas of research and clinical interest include health disparities, social determinants of health, Latino health, and integrated primary care. And I'm especially excited because Dr. Johnson was or is a fellow at my university, University of New Mexico, where I heard an amazing talk on internship. And I'm glad that you could take some time out of your busy schedule to join us today. So welcome.
Thank you. Should I go ahead and get started? I'm guessing this is my cue.
Yes, you're.
I apologize if I have to stop for a bit. I'm recovering from some weird germ that my 4-year-old gave me, so I apologize for that. I don't have the best voice right now. Thank you. I should actually also mention that I am a graduate of the University of New Mexico, their psychology program. So a proud logo here. We'll be, by now, I think everybody has already completed their cover letter, obviously. Now you're all just waiting to hear from different internship sites on about interviews. So it's a very anxiety-provoking time. I get that. I can totally empathize with that. It's not too far. It hasn't been too long from when I had to do that myself. I was an intern in 2014, and I'm now part of a part of the internship committee at Salud Family Health Centers. So I now get to be on the other side. So I totally get it. It hasn't been that long. Well, I'll be focusing a little bit more on the interview process and what you can expect and how you can prepare for that interview process. This would just be a very short presentation because I imagine that it might be best to just answer questions that you all may have related to this. But maybe I'll start answering some questions, or I might get, or maybe after this presentation, you will have new questions. Before that, I wouldn't, oh, sorry, give me one sec. Let me try to get this to work. All right. Before that, let me just tell you a little bit about Salud Family Health Centers, just so that you do know where I come from, and I just expose you to one of the other sites that's out there. Salud Family Health Centers, like Desa mentioned, is a federally qualified health center in Colorado. We hit approximately 10 counties across the state and provide services to both rural and urban patients. We do have a mission of providing quality integrated healthcare services to the communities that we serve. Part of this is providing services with cultural and linguistic understanding and sensitivity. And we do have many programs that are designed to reduce barriers to healthcare. And a little plug here, we do have an internship program as well. This was actually my major rotation when I was an intern at the University of Colorado, and I stuck around for postdoc and for my career. So here I am. Any questions about that, feel free to email me separately, and I'd be happy to talk about this. But really, you guys are here for your internship conversations. Oh, sorry, that's more information on our internship site. Let's talk a little bit about preparing for the interview and things that you probably should start thinking about before you go out for the interview. One is make sure you know yourself. You have to review your application materials. You have to know everything that you've listed in your CV. What are the different sites that you've been on, and just to be able to talk about in more detail about the different practicums practica that you've been a part of. Know your application and your cover letter. It's super important that you know your cover letter for each site. Each cover letter, I mean, typically, at least when I was applying for internship, our cover letters varied by site, and I imagine that's still the case. So really get an idea of what your cover letter looks like for that site, because it has been tailored for that site, and these are the things that people are going to be asking you during an interview. So if you mention one thing in your cover letter and you're not able to talk about it come interview, it doesn't reflect very well on you. So make sure that you know yourself. Know the site. Know who the people are, who the faculty are, what the rotations are. You don't have to know many details about it, but you do have to have some understanding of what the possible rotations are, so that you can then ask questions about the rotations and express some interest in each of these rotations. It really shows when applicants that we interview ask many questions about our rotations and our population and our mission. These are all things that get us excited. It shows that people are interested in our site. It shows that people have done their homework, that they've read about our site. But we really like it when people come in having some idea and having some questions, because they won't know everything about our site. The other thing I would also mention is practice using mock interviews. And I think this is one area that really shows when applicants are not prepared for the interviews. Sorry, it shows in their answers, maybe the brevity of their answers, but not just really the brevity, the lack of information in their answers, the lack of background in their answers. That said, you also don't want to sound like a robot who's very rehearsed. So you don't want to have a script laid out, but you do want to have many bullet points that you're going to hit whenever you are asked a certain question. And we'll talk a little bit about what kind of questions you can expect from an internship site. I would say practice with your mentors, with your advisors, practice with each other. Have a list of questions that you are prepared to answer with background about yourself. So be able to pull from your CV, your application, your cover letter when answering each of these questions. One thing that was really helpful for me is to actually have the questions written out and different points under each of these questions, points that I wanted to make sure that I touched on whenever this question was asked of me. The other thing is pump yourself up. I think people don't really pump themselves up when it comes to interviews. I think the anxiety probably gets the best of us. We are catastrophizing and imagining the worst case scenario that we're not really being confident in ourselves. You made it to this point. Odds are you made it for a good reason. So really pump yourself up and pat yourself on the back, because you're on your way to do something really big and you're clearly qualified for it. Otherwise, I imagine your faculty would not let you go out for this interview process, ideally. So that's probably the point that I can't stress enough. Interview day, first impressions matter. This is a big day, not to scare anybody or make anybody feel anxious, but it is a big day. And you want to make sure that you do have a good first impression. Like that cartoon down there shows, you're not really going to get much of an opportunity to make that second impression. So definitely be punctual, or like my mom would say, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're already late. It's good to know where you're going. Try to be there a little bit early to make sure that you do find parking in the right time and the right place. I couldn't find parking is not really a good excuse for not being on time, because there are many others who did make it on time. So keep that in mind. Be prepared and organized with your materials, with your questions. Look professional. Unfortunately, looks matter when it comes to interviews, and you want to make sure that you're looking the part and that you are looking professional. Be excited to be there. If you're not excited, if you're not very interested in the site, it comes across. People can tell when you're not excited about something, and this is not a good look. This is not something that interviewers are going to be thrilled about seeing, and it will be something that they probably take back and talk about. They'll be wondering, hey, is this really someone who wants to be at our site? I didn't sense that they were really excited. Be on at all times. This means you should always act like you're being interviewed at all times, whether it's with the other interns, whether it's with staff who are not necessarily part of the interview process. Pretend as if everybody who you are coming in contact with is an interviewer, and be professional with them as well. Sometimes interview sites do ask other people for their input and how they felt this person treated them and how respectful they were. Be confident, be self-aware. So you have to know what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, what your limitations are, and you have to be able to talk about those in a pretty educated way, and it's okay that there are going to be gaps in your training. Be able to talk about these gaps, be aware of these gaps, but also be able to talk about how you plan on filling these gaps. And finally, be yourself. We really do, whenever we interview folks, we really want to know what they really are like. We get that during interviews, people will be in their best behavior. That's good, that's expected, but we still want to see a little bit of that person who we're going to be working with day in and day out. Don't be a robot. Let yourself come out. Definitely don't. These are some of the don'ts. Don't criticize your program or the internship site that you're applying to. The reason why we don't really want to criticize the programs we come from is because it kind of gives interviewers a glimpse of how you might speak about their own program. When you're airing the dirty laundry of your program, it doesn't reflect well on the program. It also doesn't reflect well on you. So you want to make sure that whenever they are asked about what are some things that you wish had been different in your training program, you talk about them in a way that just sounds constructive, but not like you're knocking your program. Don't be negative and uninterested, and don't be self-conscious. Be self-aware, not self-conscious. And I realize that that's a very thin line to walk, but you still want to be pretty confident even in your self-awareness. These are some of the questions that I think you might be asked, and I should actually mention that some of these are questions that I've been asked during internship interviews, that we ask ourselves, that I also managed to pull from the internet. APPIC has a really good list of questions. Actually, sorry, I think it was Time to Track has a really good list of questions that you might be asked and questions that you might want to ask to interviewers and current interns. Excuse me for a minute. So questions include, why are you a good fit for the internship? This question really gets at, why should we invest all our resources on you? What is it that makes you a top candidate for our internship? And here, if there has to be some agreement on maybe the mission or the values of the agency. It's not just sufficient to say, well, I just really like working with that population. It's more about, great, so you like working with this population, but what kind of skill set do you have that's going to help us continue to provide these services to this population? What kind of knowledge base do you bring to us? How can we maybe continue to grow our program or expand our services for this population? And that passion that you have for this population or for this internship site really needs to come out. We need to be able to see that you clearly are passionate about this, and that when we work with you, that passion will remain there. This is a good time to bring in your experience. Talk about how your experience has really shaped you and prepared you for this one site, and how this experience really does make you a good fit for this site. Another great question is, what are you hoping to get out of internship? And internship is not just something that you're going to offer to a site. It's really what the site can offer you. And that's one of the big things that I think we have to remember when we apply for any kind of position, whether it's internship or postdoc or a job. It's not just what can we bring to it, but it's also what are you going to get out of it, and how is this going to help you grow professionally? So have your goals in mind. What is it that you're hoping to learn? How are you hoping to refine your skill set while on the internship? How is this going to prepare you to take that next step when it comes to applying for postdocs, when it comes to applying for a job? And this can be, I really want to continue refining my assessment skills. Granted, you should have some kind of foundation, but maybe refining means that you'll refine your assessment skills by by working with a specific population that you have a clear interest in working with, and demonstrate that through your other application materials. So have some of those ideas in mind for each site, and try to make sure that each of those expectations or goals are really tailored for each site. You don't want to go to a site and say that one of your goals is working with veterans, and you're actually not, it's not a VA that you're interviewing, a VA position you're interviewing for. So keep that in mind. These should be tailored to the site that you're applying to. Although some of those will probably generalize across sites. Tell us about a good and a bad experience you've had with a client. This is big. This is clinical internship. So they really are interested in your clinical background and your clinical skill set. And you have to be able to talk about an experience that didn't go so well. But when you talk about an experience that didn't go so well, you also have to be able to show how it could have been different, or what you would do differently this time around, and really demonstrate that you've reflected on this case, that you've thought about how you could have had how there could have been a different outcome if you had done X, Y, or Z. And similarly, with that good experience, there has to be some indication of how you really have reflected on that case, and how you maybe collaborated with others, or worked with your supervisor to really get this outcome that you had with a client. Tell us about a time you disagreed with a supervisor. This is big, because we want to know that whenever something happens, whenever something hits the fan, that we will be able to work it out together. We want to be able to know that you have some skills in managing conflict, in maybe disagreeing in a more effective manner, so that you get a desired outcome. Your theoretical orientation, you probably have it down because of your essays. Strengths and weaknesses is really important as well. I think this is always a very challenging question that you will continue to get even beyond internship interviews, whether it's postdoc or job interviews. People want to know where your strengths lie. And it's not the time to be humble. It is a time to actually talk about what those strengths are, and be able to provide examples that really highlight how this is one of your strengths. So not just say, well, I'm a very diligent person, but be able to talk about how you are diligent, and talk about instances that really reflect that. Your weaknesses, this is probably even harder than identifying your strengths, because you don't want to look too flawed, but you do want to show that you are self-aware. And people can read through your cliche weaknesses, like, well, one of the issues is that I tend to care too much, or one of my issues is that I tend to take too much on. It may be the case that this is a weakness. Be able to talk about how you are working toward addressing this weakness, and really show that you have reflected on the weaknesses that you're talking about. Again, this is a clinical internship, so be able to talk about how you would approach cases, how you might implement a treatment plan for a patient, how you would go about assessing safety in a case that involves some depression. And this really, it's not so much about coming up with a right answer. I think what people really want to see during these kinds of questions is the process, is what's your process, what's your workflow when trying to approach a case. So it's not so much, did you diagnose the patient with X, Y, or Z? It really is, how was that process that you came to that one diagnosis, for instance. Finally, and these are not all, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's a good list of many common questions, is where do you see yourself in 5 years? One thing I think that internship sites or internship interviewers want to know is that if they invest all these resources on you, that you're going to go out and do something pretty productive, and that you might, for instance, continue to promote a certain model of care, or continue providing a certain population. So be able to talk about where you see yourself professionally in the next 5 years, and how, and this is probably the most important piece about this question, is how that internship is going to help get you to that point in 5 years. You should also ask questions. So whenever people say, do you have any questions? Try to make sure that your answer is not no. So have some questions that are ready to go. It might be that in that moment you don't have questions that have just kind of come up throughout the interview, but have some of these lined up. So for the interviewer, what is a typical day like for an intern? Where do interns go once they complete their internship? You want to know if interns are making it somewhere. If 0% of their interns are making it to postdoc, it's probably not a good site, right? So you do want to make sure that you have some of this information. What do you look for in an intern? This is part of that, am I a good fit? And what opportunities for blank are available? Is this research? Is this assessment? Whatever it is that you might be interested in refining, what are the opportunities for doing this at that site? Interns are a valuable source. Definitely use interns and ask questions of them. I would say also ask them what a typical day is like for an intern. It might sound very different from an intern than it does from a supervisor. What made you decide on this site? How do you feel your internship is preparing you for postdoc for that next step? What are rotations like? What kind of support are you getting from your supervisors and your faculty? The purpose of all these questions is really for you to also figure out, it's for you to interview them. It's as much an interview of them as it is of you. And you want to make sure that you're not like the person in this cartoon who's not thrilled about their new position. You want to be excited about this. You want to remain excited about your internship come that first day and come that very last day of internship. This is going to make for a very positive experience when you really feel like it's not just that you're not just a good fit for the internship, but that it's also a good fit for you. Jot down your impressions right after that interview. Try to keep everything fresh in your mind so that when it comes down to ranking your sites, you are able to really think about, do you really see yourself at this program? Is this program going to help prepare you for postdoc? Is it going to get you closer to those professional goals that you have? I'll tell you a little bit, my personal experience. There was one site that just really rubbed me the wrong way. And there were some clear ethical issues that might have happened with that site as far as how the interview went about. And I was really conflicted, and I thought, well, I should probably rank this site because I need to increase the likelihood that I'm going to match somewhere. But at the end of the day, I decided not even to rank this site because there were so many red flags for me, and I really couldn't see myself in this program. And this was based on having asked interns questions as well. I couldn't see myself in this program, and I imagined that if I stuck around for this program, or if I somehow matched at this program, I imagined that I might be pretty miserable and I might not enjoy it. The important thing about internship is that you really get some of that experience in clinical training. All of you come from different programs. Some programs have more of a clinical emphasis than others. For those programs that don't have that clinical emphasis, you want to make sure that you really do attend a site that's going to really give you a taste of what that clinical work looks like, just because it does inform your future career choices. So granted, I think at the end of the day, you all should do whatever you and your advisors, your mentors suggest you do. My opinion is that if you don't see yourself at a site and you really think you're going to be unhappy there, that you reconsider ranking it, that you really think about whether it's going to be worth it. And granted, again, I'm saying this after having completed internship and not being in that position. So do what you will with that information. Also consider sending thank you emails at the end of it. Obviously, don't include any information about ranking or anything like you are my favorite site and you're my top choice. You really want to avoid saying things like that. That's frowned upon. But you do want to be able to thank people for spending the time to talk to you about their site. It adds a really nice, it's a really nice thing to hear from interns and learn that they really appreciated that experience. It's not gonna be the thing that makes a site decide on you, but it is just something that looks good professionally. Oh, sorry, I already mentioned this. So anyway, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Daisy, if there are any questions that you think that you have, I'm happy to start to talk about that.
Yeah, Thank
Let me
you.
go ahead and turn my camera on.
That was such a great overview of kind of like some quick tips and tricks, which was awesome. I had a question because you said earlier in your presentation that the students should be able to speak to their weaknesses and the gaps in their training. What's the best way for them to identify what those are?
Sorry, the gaps in their training?
Yeah, so in their weaknesses or the gaps in their training, what's the best way for them to identify what they are so they can speak to them like clearly?
I think as far as your weaknesses go, it's great to be able to do these mock interviews and talk about what these weaknesses are. What I meant by don't use the cliches was really think about what are the areas that you have struggled with the most, and to be able to say, this is an area that I have noticed has been challenging for me, and this is what I'm doing. So I think when talking about weaknesses, the most important thing that you can do is talk about how you are working to improve that area. So I don't even really talk about them as weaknesses. Whenever I speak about my weaknesses, I talk about my areas of growth. Like, this is an area where I think I can really grow, and these are the things that I am doing to get better in these areas. I have been speaking with my mentor to address this issue, and I've started noticing some gains in this area. So more than anything, to be able to talk about how it is that you can make those changes, how you are continuing to grow in that. So similarly around the gaps, and these are things that you probably ideally should have talked about with your mentors, with your advisors. What are some of the gaps that they notice? I was very fortunate that during my graduate training, my mentor would kind of call me out on some things that he noticed and mention, I noticed that you keep doing this. So from early on, I had an idea of what my weaknesses were, and I could talk about those and how I had gone from point A to point B, and how I continue to work on those. So definitely, I would say talk about these with your advisors, with your mentors, so that you can talk about them during that interview.
Thank you. For other people who are on the Zoom, you're more than welcome to type a question in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question if you have one. So feel free to jump in and don't be shy. You also mentioned several resources that students can the importance of mock interviews, or in terms of like knowing their sites and things like that. And one thing that stood out to me is that you talked about how important it was for us to show interest in the site and to ask questions about the site. Do you think what are the best way to get current good information about the sites that we are interviewing at?
Probably their websites. I think that's really important. I think you'll get a lot from the websites. I think whenever you are applying for any kind of position, get an idea for what their goal, that training site's goals are as far as their interns. Get an idea of what mission they might have or what values they might have, and a lot of this information is included in their websites. So anything that is published out there, anything that's on the website, that's fair game, and that's the information you really should know. Anything that's not on there, then, I mean, it just helps you learn a little bit more about the site when you do ask those questions that are not already on there.
Awesome. Thank you. See if anyone else has questions. So you talked a lot about mentorship, which is kind of what our division is known for, Division 45 especially. And I was wondering, for students who are kind of transitioning into that internship space, what is the best way for them to maybe find mentors within that site, who may not necessarily be their supervisor, but other people who can help with that process of kind of getting like comfortable or like adapted to the community?
You mean once you actually match to a site?
Yes.
I think one thing that has been, at least one thing that I learned as far as like identifying mentors when I was on my internship site was really finding who I felt most comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And for me, fortunately, it was my supervisor who I felt a lot more comfortable with. But looking at the people who are approachable, people who have a very similar who have very similar values has always been very helpful. And just simply approaching them and asking questions. I'm not one to like go up to somebody and say, will you be my mentor? It's more about asking questions and maybe setting some time to meet with this person to ask questions. And so maybe it's weekly meetings or on the fly meetings whenever it's possible, to pick their brain and to really show that you value their opinion. And I think that's really how a mentorship kind of happens organically. It's not something that you kind of just force onto somebody. I think it just happens. But it does require some cultivating. And by that, I mean, like, yeah, seeking this person out for any kind of question or support whenever an issue does come up.
Awesome.
Some sites are kind of built in a way to provide some of that mentorship. Some sites will assign advisors to interns who will help be a liaison between the different supervisors and the directors of the internship training program. But again, like, an advisor is not necessarily a mentor. I think a mentor and an advisor are different, but that is one step that is one thing I think sites do to maybe help foster some of that relationship building.
Awesome. Looks like people are shy, so I'm just gonna ask all the questions. So, oh, here we go. I'm like, I have lots of questions. So we have a question. It says, hi, when interns do not arrive on time for interviews due to flight delays, what is the best way to deal with it professionally? Call the site to reschedule or go back home and Zoom?
I think that's a challenging one because it clearly gets to logistical issues. I think communicating throughout the entire time with the program is probably the best thing to do. When you are able to maybe change your flight and it's not a huge inconvenience, I can't imagine when it wouldn't be a huge inconvenience. Staying in communication with the program and offering to do a Zoom. There are instances where your flight delays because you're having another connection or there are weather issues. If you still let your interviewers know what the situation is, and you still arrive there, I think there's a lot of forgiveness around issues like that. Even if you have to Zoom in, at least on our end, if something like that happens, we tend to be a little bit more forgiving. The tardiness was more related to you're already in the city or in that town and you just don't get there on time, which is a very different issue than having to deal with airplanes that are delayed. So my only advice to that would be like, just try to maintain an open line of communication and offer the various options that are available to still go ahead and have that interview with the site. I would say though that a Zoom interview is nowhere near as good for you as an on-site interview. What I mean by that is it doesn't give you the opportunity to really get to know the people there and to get to know the site. They'll still interview you, they'll get to know you, but you don't get to know the site. And I think that's the drawback to a Zoom meeting, that you won't be there to really get a feel for it. And you might miss out on some of the other opportunities that other folks have to get to know the interns and the faculty.
Yeah. So another question was, can you provide any insights on how sites rank applicants?
A little more elaboration on that. I think that's going to vary by site. I think it's going to vary based on like what their priority qualifications are. I don't know that there's like any specific algorithm that any site knows, but if you'd be happy to elaborate a little bit more on exactly what you're trying to get at, I'd be happy to speak to that.
Yeah, it seems like it's probably reference to, I know that we have to rank our own sites, and so I think we're wondering how that process happens on the other end.
Got it. So it's actually very similar to what you guys do. We just rank interns based on whatever predetermined qualifications a site has identified and how well they meet those qualifications, and based on whatever, those predetermined qualifications. I don't, like I said though, I don't, beyond that, I think they're just ranking this folks the same way that you are ranking sites.
Yeah, I think it also and you can clarify this as well, speaks to when you were talking earlier about being yourself, and like if you feel like it's a good fit for you, they probably have that same feeling on the other end, in terms of like not just fit, but like how you are at the site or like how they feel you are there. So I thought your slide on the things to consider when arriving on site was really important. Like not letting your nerves get the best of you and just trying to be yourself as much as possible is probably also helpful, especially if you're excited about that site as well.
Yeah, so that's important to demonstrate. The reason why I think being yourself is important is because it really gives people an idea of who you're going to be with the patients, with the other staff, with them, and you want to make sure that you're not coming across as someone who you really are not. I think when people are not genuine, it kind of shows. And it doesn't leave people with a really good feeling of like, well, who is this person really? So that's something that you want to be able to just let loose, be yourself. And when you make mistakes, it's totally okay to acknowledge that you made a mistake, to apologize for that. I think that shows that humility is great. Whenever interviewers are able to see that there is some humility, I think that's a really good characteristic in a lot of when interviewing people, and we want to know that when people make mistakes, they're acknowledging it, that it's okay to be nervous. You can acknowledge that you're nervous. We were nervous too. So actually, even interviews are a little nerve-wracking for me. Even now when we interview interns, I still get a little nervous myself. I think it's still some of that leftover from internship.
Awesome. So one of our participants was wondering about the AAPI material. So which pieces are weighted more heavily? Is it like essays or CVs or interview?
I think that's similar to the ranking question, where I think it might vary a lot as far as what sites are determining is more important for them. I think some sites will definitely think that the essays are really important. I think they're all important. I can't even tell you how I go about ranking the importance of each of those things. I think really what matters is how everything comes together. So whenever you are noticing that there are many gaps in your CV, how are you going to talk about filling those gaps in person? So I think I don't think it does any justice to talk about one being more important than the other, because I think at the end of the day, it really is about gathering all that information and trying to determine how good a candidate might be of a fit for that site. I'm sorry, I don't think that's the answer that people are hoping for, but I think it's a really hard thing to really nail and to say cover letters 1, interview 2, CV 3. I think that would be a disservice to you, because I think sites will treat that differently. I think it really is a combination of everything.
Yeah, thank you. There's a follow-up question. Is it appropriate to reach out to the site prior to applying if you have certain questions or you would like to talk to current interns?
I don't think that there's anything in APPIC rules about not doing that. Granted, I don't have all the APPIC rules memorized. I would say make sure that you review those rules and make sure that whatever you're asking is not inappropriate. I think if somebody reached out to us and said, hey, I have a few questions, can I get in contact with maybe an intern? I think that would probably be fine, assuming that there isn't any kind of APPIC issue with that. If anything, I think it does show some interest in learning more about the program and having your ducks in a row, I guess. But again, I would defer to whatever the APPIC guidelines suggest around that.
Okay. And so also with that, when discussing your career goals, do internships expect you to give certain information about the site you want to work in? So like either you're in a medical center or university setting, and then how like specified should you be in terms of like what sites you want to work in?
I think what's important about that question is, one, really having an idea that the intern themselves has an idea of where they're going, and that what they're doing is all all in an effort to really get to that point, which is why I think that it's important to be able to talk about how being at that site is going to help somebody get to their 5-year goal. I think the point of this is really to have an idea of how well you've like really thought about your professional goals, your careers, and how good of a fit we are going to be as an internship site to get you to that point. I would also say though that some sites really want to make sure that this site really is in line with your future goals. So if you are applying to work in a VA, and then what you're saying is that you really want to do something that's very different from the VA, I'm not from the VA, I should say, so sorry if I use the VA as an example, but it might make interviewers think of, well, is this really a good fit for you as much as it is a good fit for you and for us? I think if it's not a good fit for you, at the end of the day, it might not make for the best internship experience for you or for them. So I think that's why that professional question, that's why that where do you see yourself in 5 years question is really important. You don't have to have everything down. You don't have to, it's not necessary that you say, I will be working for the University of New Mexico psychology department in 5 years. That's not really what we're getting at. It's more about where is it that you see yourself in general, and how can we get you closer to that, and is this in line with your future goals? I'll give you an example. In my case, when I interviewed for that was a question that came up, and I knew that I wanted to work in an integrated setting. So I was able to talk about my interest in working in an integrated setting, providing services to traditionally underserved populations, and doing research while in that setting, and supervision and so on. So I was able to talk about some of those things. And it just so happens that my internship site was kind of awesome, or is a site that tries to get people prepared for a setting like that. So that's really where that question comes in. Are we really a good fit for you?
Yeah, so when you're saying that, I'm wondering, when people are thinking about that process as well, so not necessarily having like just a certain pathway where they're going, but I'm wondering if they also should speak to like if they know for sure what kind of populations they want to work with, or certain areas of mental health they want to be in.
I think that's really helpful. I wouldn't make it so specific though that you that it sounds like a super specialty. I would keep it broad enough, but still include that bit, like, and one of the populations that I would really like to continue working with is this population, while continuing to provide services to this larger population. So I think don't be so specific that you're limiting your possibilities, and keep it a little bit broad, but it's still okay to have that interest anyway.
Awesome. So for an applicant who has received training primarily in a university counseling center or a university setting, what would like to expand their experience into a hospital or primary care setting? How might the applicant tell their story or present as a competitive applicant when trying to switch settings? So university setting, mostly in training, but wanting to work in a medical setting.
The important thing to think about when it comes to doing something like that is how your current skill set has prepared you for the site to which you're applying. So to be able to talk about how your work with this other population really generalizes to your work with this other population. That's the important thing. Can you generalize those skills? Can those skills that you've already acquired really be used with, or really be translated to this other population? So when you're able to speak to that, I think even if you don't have that background, it shows that you've thought about it, and it actually makes the interviewers think about, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They can really come in with that skill set and use that with our current population, and continue providing these services to our folks. And we kind of look at that. We look for how people can talk about, if people don't have that integrated experience, we look at, well, what can you bring to the table? What from your current skill set can you use to continue working, to now work with this population? So you shouldn't, if that's really a setting that you're really interested in and passionate about, and that's where you see yourself going professionally, don't limit yourself by not applying for that site because you don't have that background. Just be able to talk about how your current skill set is going to help you there, and how being at that site is going to help you get to your 5-year goal, for instance.
Okay. So on a more personal level, what is something you wish you would have known before or about the interview process or internship itself?
Um, oh man, I wasn't expecting that question. See, that's why it's important to be prepared for questions. I think if looking back, I wish I had been myself a little bit more. I felt like there were times when I was just very robotic, that I wasn't allowing myself to do it. And I thought it was really important, and it is important. Internship is really important. It's not to say it's not. But I wish that someone had told me, and you know what, at the end of the day, it's okay if you make mistakes. It's okay if you just go ahead and acknowledge that you've made a mistake and try to be yourself and let that come out. You don't have to be like this really perfect person going out to interview. And that would have really helped me, at least in hindsight. I'm not sure if at that time it might have been helpful. I also wish that I had really taken more advantage of asking interns questions. So when I tell you to ask intern questions or current interns questions, it's because I didn't really do that, except for that one site where I did think about asking questions, and it mainly happened because I was in a group setting and everybody else was asking questions, so I felt I had to as well. But I really wish I had done a lot more of that and really gotten to know the current interns, to be able to make a more informed decision as far as like what is the intern experience like at this one site. And I should say, really asking questions in general. That was one area where I felt like I didn't really do a good job in, and it might have come across as lack of interest on my part. So I wish that had really been more like nailed into my head, and I had been prepared with some questions to ask.
Okay. So when sites ask you to tell you something that isn't on their application, what kind of information do you think they're looking for?
Sorry, one more time, please.
So if a site were to ask you, like, tell me something that's not on your application that I should know about you, what should we tell them?
Oh, that's weird. I've never heard that question, but I could totally see somebody asking that. It definitely should not be information that's personal and that is not allowed, right? There are certain things that sites should not be asking you. Sites shouldn't be asking you about your physical or mental health. They shouldn't be asking you about any personal issues, sexual orientation, or anything of that sort. Those are not things that sites should be asking you. I would hope that if a site asks you that question, it's not with the goal of getting some of that information out of you. I think if I were to ask that question of an intern applicant, or an internship applicant, I'd probably be looking at what other professional interests or goals they might have that are not included in the application, or what are some other areas that some other things that they've done professionally, whether it's community related, community service related, that they think we should know about, because it would really speak to their passion about working with certain people, or their values as far as their professional values. I think those might, if I were asking that question, those are the things that I'd be pulling for. So just be very careful about not assuming that what they want to know are personal questions, and you just now start divulging a bunch of personal information that then might open up a whole different conversation.
Awesome. And then, do you know, or have you heard of sites ranking applicants before their interview?
I have not heard about that. I don't know about sites ranking applicants before their interview. I would hope that sites wait until, it kind of goes back to that question about what's more important. I would hope that sites are waiting to get a better idea of who the applicant is as a whole, rather than just looking at the paperwork and ranking people based on that. So no, I can't really speak to that. I haven't heard of a site doing that. I'm guessing it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I don't know of anyone who actually does that.
Okay. And then to kind of end us and wrap us up, what is one thing or maybe one or two things that you think is most important for us to know as we go into interviewing season and kind of matching process over this next year?
You cut off at the end because of our weak network here.
It's okay. So what is one or two things that people should know as we go into internship interviewing season and matching that you think is like most important for them to remember?
I think the imposter syndrome is real, y'all. I think there will be times when you will feel like you're not cut out for it, like you are, like someone's gonna figure out that you're not a good applicant, that you're not ready to do this. And I'm guessing in some instances, some applicants might not be ready. I would say in the majority of the instances, applicants are ready and their faculty have prepared them to go out and do this. So remember that, especially if you've had these conversations with your faculty, with your mentors, when you have a pretty robust CV and you have met all your clinical requirements, remember that sometimes you will continue to feel like you really are an imposter and you're not qualified to do this. I would say that has been a struggle. It continues to be a struggle for me. I think it's a struggle for many people throughout their professional training. I think as a Latina psychologist in an integrated setting, I still struggle with that sometimes, wondering whether I'm really qualified to be doing the things that I'm doing. And I think at the end of the day, you need to remind yourself that you are. You've made it this far. You have proposed your dissertation. You're working on whatever you're working on with your dissertation. You've completed it, all the course material. You have great letters of rec. I think you need to check that imposter syndrome, acknowledge that it's there. I mean, it is there, but just check it and accept that, or recognize that maybe you are qualified to be doing this, and maybe you're as good as the other applicants who are there. It can be really easy to compare yourself to the other applicants, especially when they start talking about how great their training has been and how great the things that they've done are. There was one time when I had to do a group interview and the applicant next to me was talking about all this marvelous stuff that they had done. And so that can be really challenging to deal with, and recognize that you also bring a lot to the table and that you're qualified. So I think that's the most important thing to think about. It's rough. I know that there are many applicants and not enough spaces for all the applicants, or not enough positions for all these applicants. So if you don't match, don't forget that there is some kind of algorithm that is matching people. So it's not a reflection on how good or poor of a candidate you are. Maybe it's an opportunity to beef up your CV in some other way and maybe practice your interviews with other folks. Maybe it takes a little reframing on your end to try to make it through a non-match year. So those are, I think, don't let that imposter syndrome get the best of you. Don't let it force you into being somebody you're not during those interviews. And in the event that you don't match, try to stay positive and recognize that it's just the way that the system sometimes works, as far as like the matching goes, and just plan on beefing yourself up during that year and continue to pump yourself up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I very much appreciate you taking all the time out of your schedule, because I'm sure you're doing a lot. And so as a reminder, this will be edited and sent out hopefully by this evening. Everyone can have access to it through our Division 45 website, which is division45.com, I think. And then it also will be emailed to all of our participants as well. So thank you for coming. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I appreciate meeting you in person when you're here in Albuquerque, and then also just being willing to mentor students and support students as well. So for those of you who have additional questions, Dr. Johnson did provide her Gmail account, and I'm sure she's open to answering more personal questions as well. As she said before, just remember that there's certain things she cannot answer due to the APPIC guidelines. So as always, thank you for coming, and thank you for being a part of Division 45.
I was happy to do this, and reach out any questions you guys have. I'm happy to answer anything.
Awesome. Thank you so much. See you later.
See y'all.
Bye.